Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 49. You can submit questions at meaningfullife.com/MyLifeLive, and to dedicate any of these episodes, meaningfullife.com/MyLifeLive/dedicate. This episode is dedicated to refuah, shleimah, refuah to Yosef Yitzchak and Bracha. Being that we're coming literally from Teves, which was yesterday Shabbos, I want to address that in the context of Chassidus Applied, based on a question that I've heard from many people. It's now 28 years from when the court case was won, as the Rebbe writes in the Ha'aris, in the footnotes in the Siches, that in this day Teves was established in federal court, to whom belongs the Ksovim and the Sforim, the writings and the books of the Agudas Chassidic Chabad library. What exactly is this Yom Tov about? What are we celebrating and why are we celebrating? Is it simply due to the fact that a nephew, stole a few books and you got those books back? I mean, there are a lot of things in life that cause aggravation, as the Rebbe used the term agmas nefesh, and in even stronger terms. And then when the agmas nefesh is over and things are corrected, you don't necessarily have to make a holiday out of it. But here the Rebbe went much further and turned it into a simcha, into a Yom Tov, where for 7 days, Teves Tavshem Mem Zayin, which is 28 years ago, every day the Rebbe would speak, went to the oil. And anyone familiar with the whole parsha, which is not the place and time here to review, knows it was far more than just a court victory over a few books. The question is, what is it? And in the brief moments that we have, I'd like to share some words about that, based on, obviously, the actual sichos of the Rebbe and the Rebbe's notes and the events that took place at the time. Why am I sharing it? Why is this negated to Chassidus Applied? Because as you'll see, this is a fundamental principle in Chassidus, a fundamental principle in what a Rebbe is, and our relationship with the Rebbe. So it's extremely relevant to understand how do we apply Teves as part of now Chassidus lore, Chassidic tradition, like in the Rebbe equating it with Yutas Kislev. So it's important to understand its relevance to us today, to our children, and all the way through Mashiach and later as well. So more to say, just sur merah, that it's just a matter of getting rid of a problem, it cannot say that was the main tzachon, the main power of Teves. So briefly, and then I'll read a few notes that I'd like to read to you. The bottom line is 3 key elements that took place during that period in time, during the court case, and then the Rebbe's notes and different deposition of the Rebbetzin. 3 key pieces of information are important to know. Number 1, a note that the Rebbe wrote to the lawyers to use as a basis for the case. Number 2, the words of the Rebbetzin in her deposition, where she said, and the Rebbe referred to it a few years later, where he said the Nifteres, after the Rebbetzins Istalkus, after Chav Beishvat, the Rebbe used the reference and said that it was her words that were pivotal in the case, and her words were, when they asked her the question, to whom do the Sforim belong, to the Rebbe or to the Chassidim? She said the Rebbe himself belongs to the Chassidim. And the Rebbe made a point to say that this was a pivotal point. And of course, the third part is Judge Sifton, who issued the ruling and the verdict, his words in his document, which in a most powerful way actually captures what the Rebbe wrote in a note in Hebrew to the lawyers and to the Chassidim who represented the case. And that is, the key 2 points are the following. Number 1, that a Rebbe is not an individual private citizen, nor is he a CEO or a caretaker of a communal fund or a communal library. A Rebbe is a new type of mitzias. His whole mitzias is bittul, and that bittul means that he's bottled to the cause, and therefore his mitzias belongs to the Chassidim. That's number 1. Number 2, that lives on forever. That never changes. Because you're not talking about an individual and an individual life. You're talking about the concept of tzibur, and tzibur ein emes. It's a thing that is nitzchi. And finally, that the Rebbe's muchus, the Rebbe's essence, is not the bread that he eats and the water that he drinks, as the Rebbe made it very clear in one of the sichos in Tavshem Mem Hey, in Tammuz. But it is, as the Alter Rebbe paskins, chaye ruchnim, that he's not a man of flesh and blood. His life is not chaye psarim, flesh and blood life, but chaye ruchnim, avos Hashem, yiras Hashem, and amunah. And where do you find his essence? Anon nafshik sovis Yehavis. You find it in the words that he writes, in the svarim that he learns. And therefore the library is not just a possession. It happens to be a piece of the Rebbe himself, as the Rebbe said, shtiklach von Rebbe Malein. Because that's where the Rebbe lies his essence. So what did Teves establish? Before that, all this was not documented. We did not know what exactly is the identity of a Rebbe in legal terms of Dira B'Tachtenim, in the words of Tachtenim, in the words of a federal secular court. And we did not necessarily know what the legal relationship is of the Rebbe to Chassidim and to his possessions. And what did that establish? As Sifton writes in his case, in his verdict, in his ruling. He writes that what established was that the relationship is not just of a rabbi to a community, but a new entity. And here I want to read the note from the Rebbe that the Rebbe wrote, which we have today, B'Ksav Yad Kodshe. And what did the Rebbe write? Ki b'chol admuri Chabad. Like it is with all the Rebbes of Chabad, Hayesod Harishon. The first foundation is Bittul Hayesh. Bittul Hayesh, selflessness. Maschil ma'aba'atzmei, beginning from himself. Ba'amitis, true selflessness, beginning from the Rebbe himself. Heyesei Admur, being that he's a Rebbe, hariz a shlichus nafshis v'ikris. This is his soulful and primary mission. Lanalom, to lead them, ule'edadam, and to inspire and motivate them, b'teira mitzvahs b'chlal, in general teira mitzvahs, maschil ba'amunas Hashem, starting from faith in God, shmiras ha'shulchan aruch v'chulu, following Shulchan Aruch and so on. Ula'areisam dugma chaya b'zeh, and to show them a living example. Ad kedei mesidus nefesh b'peil, to the extent of total, giving his life totally away to it, in action, even b'peil, in action, in actuality. Upshite, and definitely, and certainly, lishlel kol pu'ula sheyuch lites lefarsham lehepach, and definitely to negate any type of action that can allow for any mistaken interpretation otherwise. La'acher zeh, the Rebbe writes, after this, after establishing the Yesod Rishon, his role, his shlichus and mission, boim chayev betur proti, come his life as an individual, his private life, so to speak. V'gam b'zeh Yesod, and also, and this is a foundation, shaloi negei klal, that it should not in any way impact or compromise b'tafkidei hakloli va'ikri, in his primary and his general and primary purpose and role. Then the Rebbe continues and spells it out in context of the case itself. He says, "Haraya ha'ikris v'shelelos kol ha'tayna shekeneged." The main proof, the main evidence, and the one that negates all the arguments from the other side is mepi hamerish rishmis, from the mouth, from the words of the Meirish, meaning the Frierdiker Rebbe himself, Rishmis official, the Shaykh Lagudis Chassidic Chabad, that the library is Shaykh, belongs to Gudis Chassidic Chabad. HaKasalka Daitach, the consideration, Ulai Kosev Rak Lefonim, that he wrote this only, so to speak, as a teretz, and only for the outside and not truthfully. Hainush Tipshus, that's foolishness. And anyone who says this, is a desecration of heaven. Hachi Godel, an unbelievably great desecration. To the extent, the one who says this, b'mezid, intentionally, is beramach, has to be placed in the thing called ramach, the Rosh Teves, the verse letters of ramach. Besignan acher ve'ikir, in other terms and primary, kol ha'tu'udes rishmis, all the formal documents, Michtovim, letters, v'chulu, kaisvim mefurish the Shaykh Lagudis Chabad, say it specifically and explicitly that it belongs to Agudis Chabad. Hatayna shekeneged, the arguments against it, hem dvorim shabal pestam, are just said orally, just in a sense informally, which tells you immediately what's more official, what's not, and what you can rely on, what you can't rely on. But I'm focusing primarily on the first lines. If it was a matter of the Rebbe, Frierdiker Rebbe, writing a letter, so quote that. The Rebbe brings the Mitzias, and what is the Rebbe's Muhus of a Rebbe? Rarely will you find a document where it's written in this type of language from the Rebbe himself, what a Rebbe is. Bittul Hayesh. What the Rebbetzin said, the Rebbe belongs to Chassidim. Such a concept does not exist. every individual in life either is a private citizen and therefore his property is inherited by his heirs, his estate, or he's, let's say, a CEO or the head of a company or a caretaker, and he's caretaking over items which also belong to the community, and he's just watching over it. And Sifton rejects both. So what does it leave the Rebbe? If he's not a private citizen and he's not a caretaker, what is he? He's a new type of Metzias, a Metzias of Bittel. And Bittel vet nicht bottel. Bittel is nitzchi. As the Rebbe said in those sichos in Tov Shemem Hey, what did he say? That they want to argue that there was a funeral 35 years ago, from Mem Hey to Tov Shin Yud to Mem Hey, and every day that passes, we're more distant from then, and so-called the inheritance passes on to the next generation, as it is in the common world. The Rebbe said, Punkt Faket, it's exact opposite. The Alter Rebbe paskins that the Chaim from Atzadik is not Chaim Psorim. It's not of flesh, it's spiritual. And therefore every day later, it gets even closer to us, and within us, and he says within Klal Yisrael, within the entire world. Thus, since a Rebbe is that's his Metzias, that Metzias lives on. Which is why it's so negei hey Teves to us today. Maybe even more than in Tov Shemem Zayin. Because what is Gimel Tammuz? Here we have a psak din that had this Agmas Nefesh not occurred, this aggravation, we would never have this resolution in language that everybody can understand. Everybody can understand that a Rebbe is Inyan, is Nitzchi, because his Metzias is not himself. Hanosi hu hakel. Chassidim belong, the Rebbe belongs to Chassidim. As I said in Lashon of Halacha, Tzibur ein mes. And the language of Chassidus, Nitzchias, of a Rebbe is such because it's connected to Elokus, and his bittul to Elokus lives on. And what the lesson to us is, you want to have the Rebbe? The Rebbe is in his words. Not just now, before Gimel Tammuz too, and before Yud Shvat too. Because it's his words that convey his nefesh. I know nafshik sovis yehovis. There's the Shkafta the Rebbe, Beryl Rifkin, who was there at the bedside during the Histalkus of the Rebbe Rashab, writes the most moving document. Friedrich Rebbe cites it in Igris Kodesh, this section, in volume 1, page 113. And he writes that the last night, Rebbe Rashab asked that he be taken into the Zal. And he said these words. He says, Ich gehe in Himmel, de Ksovim lo sich vareich. Net mich in Zal vel mir sein in einem. And the Rebbe explains, of course, when that happened, the Friedrich Rebbe became very, very disturbed, hearing such words, such espiles. And the Rebbe Rashab looked at him and said, Espiles, meichin, meichin. And from there on, as he writes in the diary, Rabbi Rifkin, the Friedrich Rebbe changed complete. He didn't see anything on him. What's the meaning of these words? Especially the end, a Rebbe is not a gashmiz dikenti. He manifests in a physical body, and our physical eyes see physicality. What Hey Teves established is this, that a Rebbe is, and his Sforim are one. That's why the Friedrich Rebbe did not leave Russia without them. The Sforim are important, the manuscript, because without the Sforim is no Rebbe. He has no connection to a Rebbeshaft. The Sforim is the etzem of a Rebbe. His Torah and the Torah he learns, as the Rebbe explained, and so on. And the Rebbe Rashab was saying, "The Ksovim lo zechayich, vi ich bin in Himmel, hotir mir in the Ksovim," as the Rebbe explains in many sichos. And then he says, "Nemin in Zal zat vel mezayin in einem." What does that mean? In Zal vo melen Torah, the place where the Rebbe sat and said Mamorim, the Fabrengens, that he gave his soul through the thing vel mezayin in einem. So yes, we'd love it to also be begashmis, and mitzvah Hashem it will be bekorev. However, meanwhile, there's no shinui in the etzem inyan, and Hey Teves became a psak din that in a federal court established this. So it's established, number one, the Rebbe is not a private citizen, he's not a CEO, he's not a caretaker, he's a mitziuse, is bitl hayesh, total bitl. That lives on. Where does it live on? In his Sforim and his Ksovim. And he belongs to Chassidim, that means to you and I. And the question is, what are we doing with the Rebbe that belongs to us, so to speak? And of course, it comes down to the connection is based on our learning. And when you sit down, yes, you go in a zal, or wherever you sit down to learn, you open up a sefer from the Rebbe, or from Chassidus, or from all the Rabbeim, which are all one. That's how you connect. Yes, it would have been a lot nicer and easier before Gimel Tammuz, but Hey Teves That's the psak. There's much more to elaborate on this. I just want to add one more thing. In a beautiful sikha in Vayikra, Tov Shemem Zayin, Shabbos Pasha Vayikra, was Hey Nissen. So the Rebbe spoke a lot about the nitzchis of Nesius. And he brought from a maimer, the first maimer that the Frierdiker Rebbe said when, right after Beis Nissen. The Frierdiker Rebbe said in the maimer, he's speaking about Kelim of Atzilus. And Kelim of Atzilus, we know, Iyu v'chayu echad, Iyu v'garmu echad. God, you are one with your Eris and one with your Kelim, according to the Taich and Ageres HaKedesh and Simachov. Some places it interprets Chayu v'Garmuy as Meich and Midas, but here Eris and Kelim. And also the Kelim are one. And he explains there in the Maimer, because Kelim of Atzilus are Elikus. They're the so-called, you can say, the divine paintbrush, the divine tools, as opposed to Eir, which is the divine energy. But that too is one. A human being, for example, your energy is within you, and use a paintbrush, lav dafka. The paintbrush is an extension of your essence, of your being. Within the Kelim of Atzilus, as opposed to the Kelim of Biyah, the Kelim themselves are an extension of Elikus. They're divine tools. Kedusha le'zazim im kema, and therefore the Kelim always remain nitzchim, not just the Eris. And then the Frierdiker Rebbe brings in this maimer, Reish is Goyim HaMolech, and the Rebbe quotes it. He writes the following. I'm reading now from Sefer HaSichos Tov Mem Zayin, page 376, the Sikha Vayikra Mem Zayin. Ad kedei kach, that year, when they gave an alikut for Likutei Sichas, this was mugeh as a Sikha of the Sikha that the Rebbe said that Shabbos. I had the schus to write the Sikha. The Rebbe told them, instead of using the likud they prepared, they should translate this, and they translated, that became the likud. So it was printed that week twice. That's how important the Sikha was to the Rebbe. And the Rebbe writes, Yesh shleimah, as he's talking about the Frierdiker Rebbe, hat das madig gewen in sein ersten Maimer, Teres Chassidus betur Nossi. Was beweist, dass Ascholo v'ikr v'yisod in sein ganzer Nesius. Interesting, the same Asius, Yisod, in sein Yisod Arishan, in the Zettel, and here Yisod in sein ganzer Nesius. Dibra Maschel Reishis Goyim HaMolech v'Achrise, which was also the last Maimer from the Rebbe Rashab. He says, Umokim atera v'aveder shel tzadik, b'ktushosehu gam la'achar alesei, Mechai hagufis l'chaim ha'mitim. Va'oros eir avidos nisher b'mkemei, di shleimah sha'amokim sheboi lomad v'osek b'teir v'chol kelav, she'ishtamish b'hem l'tzorchei haveda kedushosei aleim mechelkei birurei be'elam. Basically, that everything that he worked with, the kelim themselves, even after he's physically not here, the space where he was, and all the kelim that he worked with, there's the same kedusha, because that's part of the birur that he accomplished in this world. And then the Rebbe continues, he brings an explanation through a sipur about his father, the Rebbe Nishma Seid, the Frierdiker Rebbe's father. For the isi pam, I once saw, ki kvei kedushas amur, that my father, Nichnas, went into the cheder of my grandfather, the Rebbe Marash, and the order in the room was the same as it was b'chayav, as it was in the lifetime of the Rebbe Marash, and he says this was be'erech in the year Mem Hey or Mem Vov. So that would make the Frierdiker Rebbe 5 or 6 years old. Tafresh Mem Hey, Tafresh Mem Vov. V'nichnas lovush b'chagura, he went in dressed with his gartel. V'omad eitz la'ashulchan, he stood near the table. L'mul kisei shifte, he sat right across the chair of the Rebbe Marash. V'sfosav noyes k'medaber, and his lips moved like he was speaking. U'bocha harba, and he cried much. And he explains why. Because everything is there, be'efa nitzchi. Just to elaborate and embellish upon the point. Even though here we're talking about the ksovim themselves, be'efa nitzchi. I once heard from Michal Pekarski, who was a sheikhet, Olav HaSholem, I once sat near him, on Yom Kippur, by the break, by the Afsaka between Musaf and Mincha. So we were talking. So he said he remembers that he was the first year, Tovshin Yud, after the Stalkers of the Frierdiker Rebbe, so the first Yom Kippur was Tovshin Yud Aleph. So he was there upstairs in the Frierdiker Rebbe's room where they davened. And by the Afsaka, everyone left the room. He said he remained saying Tillim under a talis in the corner. Suddenly the Rebbe, the Unzer Rebbe, walks into the room, looked around, didn't notice anyone, didn't see him sitting there, or maybe did, but didn't seem to be aware that he's sitting there. He opened up, closed the door, opened up all the shafas, which were the ksovim, all the writings, and all the books that were in the Frierdiker Rebbe's room and began to cry. All the shafas were open. He opened them all up and started crying. How do you explain this story? He could have just stood and cried there in the room. The ksovim were not just ksovim. These is the soul of the Rabbeim engraved. Nafshis ksovis Yehovis. Like the Eibishter says on Anochi, Anon nafshi ksovis Yehovis. In Teira, Teira is not Eisi atam leichim. The Teira is not just a document of the Eibishter's ideas or rotzen. It could have been, it's his desire, it's his wisdom. Which we go further. We don't just say he's one, as you say with the Sfiris. You say this expresses his essence. However you explain that. So by the Rabbeim, Tzadikim Deim Lebeiram, that's what we're talking about. And that was the issue. It's far more than about an individual taking a few books and then being returned. It's about the status. What are these books? Are they just other books in the library? Status of the Svarim, of the Ksovim, the status of the Rebbe and his relationship with us, that affects us till this day. And there you have it. In some, I'm sure we could elaborate more, but I want to move on and connect it also to Parsha Vayechi, because Vayechi is exactly the same thing, this week's Parsha. Vayechi Yaakov Beretz Mitzrayim Shvayas Shana. The question is asked like the question of Chaya Soda. You start reading, you think, Vayechi, this is the story about life of Yaakov. It's a story about his misa. Yaakov lay mess, you can't say misa. It's a story about his istalkos and his preparations for it. Chaya Sarah, the same thing. You think it's about the life of Sarah. You start reading, no. Meir v'esim v'sheva shanim, Kuf Chav Zayin Shad, and talk about her passing and her burial, etc. So the Rebbe asked the big question, you want the story about the Vayechi Yaakov? Read the Parshas, Vayigash, Miketz, primarily Vayechi, Vayishlach, Teves, Vayechi, Vayishlach, Vayeshev, all the way through Miketz, and Vayigash. You want the story of Chaya Sarah? That's the Parsha before, Vayera, L'lech Lecha. So how do you call this Chaya, Vayechi? Because Chaya Tzadikim is Chayim Ruchnim. When do you see real life? Not the Gashmias. Gashmias, you see the presence. You see the effect on us, in a basar. You want to see something that lives, and living when you call Teda calls Chayim means Chayim Amitim. You see when the physical is not there, does it live on? That's what you see. So whether it's Mazare B'Chaim, Afu B'Chaim, however you explain it, but the bottom line is, that's when you call it true Vayechi Yaakov. The Teda should call Vayechi Yaakov. It's not just the biography of events that happened during the time when he walked on this earth. It's about events that are happening today, that we live with Yaakov today. And Yaakov lives today, and Chaya Sarah and Sarah lives today. So the connection is very clear. Let's now move on to another topic. The action from all of this, of course, has to be, is that how much we already learn. We have to dedicate ourselves and remember that the Rebbe belongs to Chassidim, and that means he belongs to us, and it's up to us. Either you're going to open a sefer, and you're going to be dedicated to Chassidus, Ad Kedei Mesidus Nefesh, because this is the Rebbe living in you. I don't want to say the other option. That is what Teves teaches us. Vayechi teaches us. That it lives now, but now the life is dependent on what we do. And we bring it alive, or we allow it to sleep. And this is the essence of why we do MyLife Chassidus Applied, because it's about being driven to take Chassidus, make it come alive in our personal lives. Not just as a book on the shelf, not just as a book that we read from time to time, but one that comes alive. Chayenu ve'erech yameinu. Alive, applied in our personal lives. Okay. Some follow-up to the previous discussions. There's been many comments on my talks about the Mashiach and signs and so on. I think we covered it pretty much extensively. I don't want to go over rehash. I do want to say, however, since there's been so many emotional reactions, mostly positive, but as always, you always get comments that don't always agree with you. I will just say the following. Reiterate one thing. And that is, the bottom line is action. We could be mafalpul and pilpulim aherahin, with all kinds of svaras and questions and answers and so on. It comes down to one thing, as I just said about Teves. What are you going to do? What am I going to do? It's 20 years from Gimel Tammuz. Are we going to do whatever it takes, and bring Teres HaMashiach, which is Chassidus, to people that we meet, to ourselves, take it seriously, and not just some halakha aces that don't speak to our hearts and souls because it's too abstract? Are we going to make it relevant in our lives? Live with it, breathe with it every moment, and do the same with everyone we meet? Or we're not, God forbid. That's the only question. Everything else is theories. And theories are theories. The Rebbe left us a mandate and said, you have something you have to do. And that's what it comes down to. I am willing, anyone who's ready to do some action, call me, contact me, I'm in. I try to do my things, whatever I can do, but there's so much more to do. We have a big world out there and that we have to reach. So if anything that comes out of this is that anyone listening to this, anyone watching this, is take it seriously. And it's not my words. That Rabbeim poured their hearts and souls out. They were Meser Nefesh, as I just elaborated. And you don't need my words. Go look in the Sichos and the Maimorim and see just the pages and pages, the volumes and volumes of material. Just look behind me, which is just a small percentage of all of Chassidus. What are we doing to make it viable and real? Because when Mashiach comes, that's what it's going to be. People are going to live with Mola Oretz Deis Hashem, with Lo Yeh Esek Elam El Ladas Hashem B'lvad. So after all the Papulim agree, don't agree, doesn't really make a difference. What are we going to do? Do something, and I do something, and we put together our heads, or we do it separately. That speaks volumes more than anything else. And it's high time. Imlei Achshav Emoseh. If not now, when? There's also, I want to follow up on the topic of Baal Teshuva disillusionment. So I read some of the questions last week. I won't read them again, but it comes down to one thing. People who joined so-called the Chabad community with all kinds of enthusiasm because the world that they were lived in was hollow, missing things and so on, missing purpose and mission, and they sensed the vision, the pioneering revolutionary spirit of Chassidus, and they enter and some get disillusioned. They don't find what they were really looking for. Some get very disillusioned, some get less disillusioned, some people accept it. So I want to address this, and as I said last episode, I want to repeat, this isn't just an issue for so-called Baal Teshuva. It's also an issue for Baal Aveda, for all of us. What's the issue? The issue is it's very easy to become a conformist and do mitzvahs anoshim l'mod, the mechanical mitzvahs. Because it's a comfort zone. We all gravitate to comfort zones. The Alter Rebbe has a whole Perek in Tanya, Perek Tezvav, that challenges comfort zones. Even comfort zone of Gedusha. Even if you learn 100 times Torah, which was the custom in the time of the Talmud. Today, people don't do that. It would be a big thing if someone did that. But then it was a custom. Lo yavodeh. You're called as someone who didn't serve. Eved Elokim. Who's a servant? Who learns Me'eh Pomim V'achas. That one time that's out of your comfort zone. Which of course is relative. If you learn 5 times, then it's 6. If it's once, it's the second time. That means not allowing ourselves to get trapped in the reverie, in lull of just comfort. If you do that, Chassidus, nothing can help you. So it's not an automatic button. You enter the world of Chassidus and suddenly you're going to meet revolutionaries. Yes, Chassidus gives you the tools, it gives you the vision, it gives you the perspective, it gives you a model, it gives you a game plan, all that. But you have to ignite something inside of you to react to it. No one's immune from the conformity of this world. No one's immune from the Elam Kimin Hagin Noyeg, the trap of time, where we just get trapped in routines and in patterns and in habits, good and bad. No one's immune to that. But what we have in the Chassidic world is the gunpowder, powder. You have everything there, but you still need to do that one move, which is your effort. It could remain in the books, Chassidus, or you can do something and ignite the spirit. So I say the following. Anyone that has that revolutionary spirit, and everyone does, and you came into it, the fact that you succumbed to what others so-called put pressure on you, that's a mistake. And yes, we can learn much, because when you have a Shabbos table, and who comes to the Shabbos table, someone who doesn't agree with you, that's when the Shabbos table comes alive. I mentioned this story a number of times. If I haven't, I'm mentioning it now. A woman called me from the community and said she has a son, he's 17 years old, and refuses to come out to the meal Friday night. He stays in his room, and she thinks he's doing things that are not exactly Shabbos-dik. What should she do? So I asked her, what does the meal look like? What does Shabbos look like? So she described. I said, what about last Shabbos? Same thing. same food, the same arguments, you fall asleep at the same place, the same nigunim. It becomes routine, doing Shabbos. So you could, like the expression goes, you could eat kosher and not be kosher. You could keep Shabbos and not be Shabbosdik. You're technically doing it, but Shabbos is a lot more than just action. So I said, so why would a 70-year-old son, who probably has a lot of energy and looking for adventure and looking for something passionate, come to a boring table that he's seen for years and years and years? You're lucky he's still in his room. He'll get a little older. He's going to leave the house altogether. I didn't say that as a threat. I just meant to describe the situation. What can I do, she said. I said, what you should do? Well, it could have happened many years earlier, but now at least for your younger children, make sure your Shabbos table comes alive. How? Invite someone. If your husband works in the city, let him invite a colleague. Invite an atheist, so-called atheist. Argue about God, about mitzvahs. You'll come alive because you feel the passion to discuss it. So sometimes that's exactly what we need. The Baal Teshuva is a bracha, not only to the Baal Teshuva who finds so-called Chassidus, is for the people who he's found, so to speak, they can find him because he can give them something, the novelty, that appreciate, that someone who's been used to it, who's grown up with it, may not appreciate. You see the passion, you see the energy. So it's a tragedy that the person who came in has now become like the people who were there. The whole point of your coming was not just for you, it was also to warm up and motivate and inspire those that taught you. Why does a student, when they asked the great teacher, he said, who did you learn most from? He said, I learned much from my teachers. I learned even more from my colleagues. From my students, I learned more than all. What does that mean? He learned more quantity. He will learn more wisdom. He may have learned much more from his teachers. But the passion, the depth, when you're challenged by a student, is a completely different category, different quality than when you're with your teachers, where you don't have to necessarily push yourself in that way. To bring it to Talmidim with mashalim and examples, and especially a student who may not get it right away, forces you to dig deeper. That's the relationship. And that's what Chassidus demands from everybody. So the follow-up question was, should we be learning anything from the secular world? This was in context of the Baal Teshuva. So first of all, it's talk about Aisa Bar Alma. Everything we need to know is in Teves, because the Teves, of the contrary, the Teves is the blueprint for everything in the world. However, let's be honest, we've just talked about this. A doctor was given permission to heal. Technology was not built necessarily by the greatest Talmidei Chachamim. Why? Because the Eibishter also created Chochmas HaElam, Chochmas HaTeva, and allowed human beings, Chochma B'goyim Tamin, allowed human beings to understand, examine, and develop a science of understanding God's mind in nature. It's one with God's mind in general, even though many people may not know that. So there too, there's a divine mind within the science and technology. So yes, can we learn things from that? Of course we can. Does it mean we learn things from secular people or from secular life, from Yiddishkeit? Not necessarily. Absolutely not. But to learn something, he created nothing new. Nothing for no purpose. When David HaMelech wondered, what is the role of a spider? The Eibishter showed him that a spider saved his life when it weaved a web that made the soldiers of Shaul pass by and realize there may be nobody in that cave. So everything in this world has something to teach us because God created it. Whether it's and the truth is, who's the wise person who learns from everyone? And Kol Adam doesn't just mean scholars and Yerushalayim. From everyone you can learn. But you have to distinguish, first of all, where's your primary source of Chochmah coming from? That's from Torah. Torah itself tells you, you go out and you learn things from every Hashgacha Pratis. A leaf turns over in the street. You meet a person. You hear something. Obviously, things that are not al pi Torah, you hear from other things in the secular world, are some things you have to filter out and sift through. But above all, we all can learn from each other. But above all, what you learn most is the passion, like he speaks in Tanya Perek Zayin, that Simoin Gadol, the great thirst that someone has who has not drunk water. That has much to teach people, because it gets you out of your comfort zone and you see prices that someone pays. Mesiras Nefesh teaches you, someone who's been complacent, to get motivated and ignited again. So I'm sad to hear about disillusionment and disappointment. I understand where it's coming from. But remember, we're adults. We have to be responsible for ourselves. Can I tell you, here and here is the right community, that's a perfect community of revolutionaries that have not compromised? Every community is made up of individuals. There's some that are that sadly become resigned. Some are broken. Some have lost their idealism. But there are in every community gems. Everyone's a gem. But there are gems who retain their revolutionary spirit and who use Chassidus. You have to find those gems. Think of it like la carte. Create your own meal from different individuals. And let's build our own grassroots communities that capture the ideal of what Chassidus wants, the pioneering spirit of Avram Avinu, of Moshe Rabbeinu, and all the great leaders who came to change the world, not to become part of it. So I say to all those that feel disillusioned, yes, we could sit around and complain and talk about what could have been, what should have been, or we can take the bull by the horns and not be observers and become non-spectators, but become players in the game and make a difference. Find someone. Find a chavrusa, find someone. You'll find people that have kindred spirits that have that type of power and spirit and energy. And that's what needs to be done. And the rest of us who feel that we are satisfied with our lot and comfortable, that's not what Chassidus wants. Every day has to be new passion. Just observe the Rebbe. Never satisfied with all the accomplishments. And until we don't finish the job, which is Mashiach, we can definitely not rest on our laurels. Even after that, there'll also be continued growth. In Kedusha itself, from good to better, and better to even better, and so on. But now for sure, until we finish this job of destroying the complete helem of the Tzimtzum and revealing a Lakus and godliness and Mola Oretz Deis Hashem Kamayim Layom Mechasim. Another follow-up was the issue of should we dilute Yiddishkeit when inspiring others? So I spoke about it briefly. Well, before I go on, let me just say one more thing. I realized there was another question. Someone referred to an article written about someone who bashed or was speaking about this disillusionment and criticized orthodoxy. Well, let me say this. The word orthodoxy in general, as you may know, the word is a man-made word that has no meaning, frankly, because there's nowhere in the word Torah the word orthodoxy. I've told the story a number of times. I spoke in Miami Beach after my book, Torah Meaningful Life, was published. In Lincoln Road in South Beach, they have every November they have the International Book Fair, Miami Book Fair. After my talk, a woman got up and said, it was an auditorium in Lincoln Road, it's called Colony Theater. A beautiful auditorium, a woman gets up, and the acoustics there are great. So you hear every word, you could hear every breath. And she says, before I get your book, I want to know one thing. What do you think about, what's your opinion about conservative Judaism? She meant conservative, not as in opposed to liberal, but conservative as in Reformed, conservative, Orthodox. Because I hear people like you don't recognize conservative Judaism as legitimate. And I don't want to buy the book of a bigot, as she put it. The whole place, like I saw, got very, very quiet. Everyone wanted to know what I was going to say. I guess the question was on more than one mind. So I decided to take advantage of the moment, and I said, yes, indeed, I don't recognize conservative Judaism. And I was quiet. And the whole place began to hem and haw. And I said, one second, before you get violent and stone me, let me just say this. I also don't recognize Orthodox Judaism, or ultra-Orthodox, or conservadox, or reformadox, or reconstructiondox, or all the other doxes that have been or will be created by different people. Why? Because the constitution of Judaism, called the Torah, doesn't make any reference to these doxes, to these denominations, to conservative. They say in the name of the Rebbe, I never saw it, but I heard, that labels are for clothing, not for people, not for souls. Is a soul defined by human labels? And I said, I reversed the question to you. What about Moses? Was Moses Orthodox, conservative, or Reform? And what about God? Is God Orthodox, conservative, or Reform? For that matter, is he Jewish? Is he a he? Anyone with rudimentary understanding, even a rudimentary understanding of soul, knows you can't impose a man-made description to a soul. You can't say a soul is brown or black or white, or tall or short. A soul is a spiritual entity. You could say Tselem Elikim, however that's explained. Tselem Udmuz, B'Tzalmenu Kidmusenu. So you're not born with a certain type of conservative, Reform, Orthodox soul. That's ridiculous. Neshama shenesata b'tahiri. Everyone says that every morning. Just to tell you the end of the story, so the woman responded to me, how do I know that's true? So I said, look, I feigned incredulousness, I feigned indignation, and I said, look, lady, you're going to have to buy the book. Life is filled with risks, and if you don't like it, we'll return the money to you. I don't know if she bought it or she didn't, but it definitely became good material for a story. I've written about it. So the word orthodoxy in general is not a word I would use. And I understand when many people use it, they mean orthodoxy means people who believe Teves min hashamayim. Before people send me notes, I understand all that. Most of the secular world has no clue what that means. Most of the secular world think Orthodox are some parties in Israel that are trying to get money for their organizations. So let's use Teda language. Aid is Aid, Anashame, Beguf, Chelik Elikame, Malmamish, Tzelem Elikim, however you want to define and interpret it. Why am I saying it? Because even the word religion always bothered me. A religious Jew, a religious person, suggesting there's a thing being human, being a person, and then there's a religious person. What is this religious this adjective? He's a better human being. So most people don't define that. Religious means it also has rituals. Most people define religion connected to rituals. So that may be part of the answer. That's why it's important to know how to use words in English that explain. What are we talking about here? Who knows who's more religious? Friedrich Rebbe once told a woman, Mrs. Denberg, who gave money for the yeshiva, and Friedrich Rebbe was giving her brachas for her tzedakah and so on. And she started crying. And the Rebbe said, why are you crying? She said, Rebbe, ich bin nicht fromm. And the Rebbe said to her, mein Tochter, heint zu Tag, weiss mir nicht, wer ist fromm. So who exactly is fromm? The person who puts on tefillin every day and keeps Shabbos, kashrus, all very important. But Rahman al-Islam doesn't have any Ahavas Yisrael, or does not have chesed, does not kind to another person. Who defines exactly which mitzvah is exactly most important? Haftarecha kamecha is the klal gadol b'teira. So if someone does Ahavas Yisrael, mamish and eifin of kanois in the most extreme way, but is somewhat, God forbid, weaker in other areas, what do you say? We don't answer that. No one gave us the role who's more frum, who's not frum. It's not our job. God will figure it out if He wants to figure it out. Our job is to bring Elikus and ignite every soul we meet, including ourselves. And Torah mitzvahs is the tools to do that. Person, God forbid, doesn't do a mitzvah yet, doesn't mean his neshama doesn't exist. It means his neshama is not a flame, not fully blazing. Even a criminal in prison has a neshama, but the neshama is trapped, like the Alter Rebbe once said to the Chassid, who had a big mind, a great mind. He said, if you learned, you could be a Goan Adir. He said, Rebbe, mir wissen, as ich ken. So the Alter Rebbe said, Pung ve aganef is nicht der, was ken gavenen. Just like a thief is not someone who could steal, but one who steals, a Talmid Chacham is nicht der, was ken lernen, and der, was lernt. Not someone who could learn, but someone who does learn. So it's actualizing potential. The soul has that potential. So the bashing of orthodoxy sometimes is in place when you're referring, not bashing of Jews, you're bashing of people who may be conformists, who may be doing rituals in action, but not in spirit. There's a spirit to it. There's a neshama. As we know, doing a mitzvah without a kavanah, or tefillah without kavanah, keguf b'lei neshama. A body without a soul. So obviously we need the vitality that goes hand in hand with the body, but a soul without a body is equally floating and doesn't have grounding in this world. So, though there's room to criticize, firstly you have to know if it's any benefit. Secondly, even if there is, you have to realize you're criticizing human beings, not Judaism. You're criticizing people who are not living up to what the Torah and Chassidus demands of us. Which leads us into the next question. The follow-up about the issue of diluting. Should we dilute Yiddishkeit when inspiring others? The answer unequivocally is no. There's no reason to dilute. As the Rebbe said a number of times, our shita, our derech is like this. You tell somebody there's 613 mitzvahs. And then mitzvah geredes mitzvah. Start where you're able. Everyone has their entry point. But mokim shalibe chafetz, as the Gemara says. Start where your heart desires. And one mitzvah leads to the other. So we don't dilute. We can tell someone what the standard is. You could say, I am also not where the standard is. We're all in that direction. It's very different than saying somebody, you know what, since you're a tinik shanishba, you're ignorant or didn't grow up with it, there's one mitzvah for you and that's it. No, you tell them. Like you show even a beginner student who's studying art, you don't just say, that's all you need to do is make a little line or two. You show them what the masters have accomplished. You show them the so-called perfection of the model. And then you say, now, aspire to it. So as the Alter Rebbe once said, that a person has to know how small they are and how great they can become. If you don't tell them the whole picture, you dilute it, you're not giving them the opportunity to grow towards something. Then you're showing them, you know what, since you're clipping their wings and limiting them because you're afraid to show them the whole picture. Show them the picture, and then say, now we all climb this mountain, each in our own way, at our own pace. So you know how small you are, where you're at, but you have to also know how great you can become. So it's not diluting. Umekarvan l'teira. Eivis abrius. You have to love everyone, even if they have no other quality but being a creature, which is rare to find. But just an example, as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya Lamed Beis, Perek Lamed Beis. The Rebbe Medayik, Bri is ba'alma. It's not the only quality. But then, not you say, well, since he's only a Bri and doesn't have any other qualities except that he's God's creature, Lech l'umen shasani. You could argue, okay, if that's the case, let me dilute Torah and spoon feed it in a way that completely compromises it and just gives him what he needs to hear. The answer is no. Mekarvon l'teira, not mekarv teira loy. He's takebrius, and now you start lifting him up. So when you give a child and spoon feed the child, it's the whole teira is in there. The Rebbe would bring from the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Aleph of Anechi, Hashem Alekecha, includes in it the whole Anechi. Anechi includes all the Aseres Adibris. Aseres Adibris includes Kol Teira Shebiksav, which includes all Teira Shebal Peh and everything. So it's in there. You're not compromising it. Obviously, you can't tell him in day one the whole Teira standing on one foot. That's why you say, Ma'da Allah Sani, Chaver Chalesavid, or whatever it is, Avis Yisrael. But the point is, you're not compromising. You're simply saying, step by step, to get to a far greater picture. And the ultimate goal is to become one with Elokus, the highest levels, even for every person, everyone in their own way. The Rebbe brings his father's diuk in the Pasuk. When Mashiach comes, it says that Kulam Yedu Esi, Lemiktanam V'Agdelam. Lo Yilamdu Eid Ishas Re'eyu. When Mashiach comes, one will not teach another, because Ki Kulam Yedu Esi, everyone will know Esi Mi Atzmus. Lemiktanam V'Agdelam, from small to big. The question is, it's a contradiction. You just said there won't be a teacher and a student, and they'll all know God. Why then say Miktanam V'Agdelam? Because it doesn't mean that we'll all be equals. It means from Katan to Gadol, everyone will be able to have a connection straight to Atzmos, to Esi. While you still remain who you are, in your level. B'chol ma'edcha, ma'ed shalcha, reaches the ma'ed amiti, real bligvul. Because on your effort in the Gavra, the person made an effort, as I said before from Tanya Perek Tezvav, you break your natural comfort zone. For the one person, a break may be learning 100 times and 101. For another person, it means just learning once, because it's not his comfort zone. Who measures these things? For him, that took that type of effort. Therefore, that's a keli for bligvul, for AC. So the bottom line is, we don't dilute, we channel, we educate. And when you educate, a real master educates, he finds ways to communicate the whole thing in smaller words. It may take effort. Not everyone is able to do that easily. But that's the answer to that question. Let me continue on. The importance of friendship in Chassidus. Well, this came as a result of a series of questions that came to us about friendship, the importance of friendship, and so on. Recently, me and my longtime best friend have experienced a rift. I acknowledge that at the moment we are in different places in life. Nevertheless, I am very distressed. Without getting into the details, do you have any advice on nurturing our relationship? Question number 2. Before I became frum, I had a very close friend. We could talk about anything. And we enjoyed each other's company a lot. As we became frum together, we parted ways going to different yeshivas. In the beginning, our friendship was still strong. We were always excited to find out how the other is doing and what new things he's been learning, etc. Now that it's been a couple of years that have passed, it seems that the relationship has been completely ruined. Now, when seeing each other, we go immediately into this competitive mode where we compete about who's growing more, achieving more, who becomes more known in the frum world. Everything is just jealousy and competition now between the two of us. At least this is how I feel. They definitely have mentioned to me that they feel the same way at times. I feel we still can talk heart to heart more than with other friends. However, it's not the same anymore. When we're around people, it's just not good feelings. Is there anything you can suggest in renewing the friendship and strengthening it? And many other such questions. So I want to address the issue of a friend. Let's start with the Hayem Yem Chavdala Teves, which is coming up. Histalkus Admur is welcome B'Kfar Piyana, he writes, and the Reb Marash, as the Tzemach Tzedek, Was hat der Seide gewollt? Mit Darkei Chassidus, with the ways of Chassidus. And what did he want with Chassidus? And the Tzemach Tzedek answered, Darkei Chassidus sein shachsidim kuli yir k'mashpocha achas. The Darkei, the ways of Chassidus is that all Chassidim should be like one family. Al pi Teire ba'ava, according to Teire, with love. Chassidus, hi chayis. That's the answer to the second part. What do you want with Chassidus? Not just Darkei. Darkei is, so to speak, the ways of Chassidus, the paths of Chassidus. That's life, vitality. Lahazim chayis u'lahoyeres ha'kel. Kel es ha'loitev, lahakeres ha'matzav hara, b'nafshi kadei l'sakne. To imbue vitality and to radiate everything. Also the negative. To recognize something negative in order to repair it. There's a pisgum from the Baal Shem Tov. Ein oni mekenish meshaya zayin. The effect of avos reim, the love of friends. Chaverim ha'me'erim rachmim rabim al chaverim uben gilam. Friends who awaken compassion, great compassion on their friends and on their own peers of age. B'shas dochkei, when a person is in anguish, difficulty, kedim gzardin shel shivim shana. You can, friendship and love can tear up a decree, can destroy a decree of 70 years. Hefchim hemasaklola lebracha. You can transform curse to blessing, and samovis, death, l'chaim aruchim, to long life. This is from the Sefer HaTeilis of the Frierdiker Rebbe, page 131. So there's Igeres from the Rebbe, Frierdiker Rebbe as well, in Igris Kedish. Volume 3, and it's the letter Beizir Tafresh Tzadikei. Well, you can read it yourselves inside, but I just want to touch upon where he talks about Yediyas Upsurus. I said talk about Be'emes Yediyas Upsurus Hatev Mi'ish L'Re'ehu Echad Hadrochim B'Darkei Chassidus Ba'avos Reim. He talks about the Mishpocha Achas. It's probably the source of the Hayom Yom. So he elaborates a little more on the whole topic. That's page 323 in volume 3 of the Igris Kedish of the Frierdiker Rebbe. I once heard a story that someone was by the Rebbe in Yechidus, and it was a doctor from a Midwestern state, middle of this country. And he was told that when he comes to New York, I guess by a shliach or someone, that he should make sure to have an audience with the Rebbe. It was the earlier years. So he did that. He called up, they got an appointment. This was the time, he came, he waited, went in. And the Rebbe gave him a chair, he sat down. He was never by the Rebbe, doesn't even know what a Rebbe is. And he's quiet. So the Rebbe says to him, what's your name? How can I help you? He says, I don't know if you can help me. Why are you here then? The Rebbe asks him, he says, because I was told that if I come to New York, I can't miss seeing you. But frankly, I don't really know why. So the Rebbe smiled and said to him, I'm not that comfortable with someone coming here not really wanting to be here. But since Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence, we happen to be together right now, maybe there's something on your mind that you want to ask. Maybe we can discuss. So he said, yeah, okay, tell me, what is a Rebbe? Why do they revere you so? To the point that they told me to come here, even though I had no idea what I'm coming to. So the Rebbe responded to him, I'm a friend. Or I tried to be a friend. The man said to the Rebbe, friend, that's the whole thing. I have many friends. The Rebbe said, no, let me define what a friend is. A friend is someone that you can speak to, like you speak to yourself, without defenses, without apologetics, without fear of being judged. You can just speak heart to heart. That's a friend. And the Rebbe said, no, how many friends like that do you have? She said, I don't have any such friends. It's hard to imagine that you can have a friend like this. And we don't know about the rest of the Yechidus, but it was for a period of time, 15, 20 minutes, I believe. And the man changed, and he became a Ashtikul Chassid. He told the story. He never tells about the rest of it. But clearly the Rebbe became his friend. The Rebbe's way of putting something that says in Chassidus, says Yechidus, is from the word Yechida. Yechidus means private audience, but it also from the word Yechida. Yechida meets Yechida. It says this in Maimorim and Sichos, that the Yechida of a person's soul, the innermost dimension of your soul, meets the Yechida of the Rebbe. The Rebbe put it in simple terms, friend. But it always struck me, that was the word the Rebbe used. Now, Kemuvan, none of us are a Rebbe, but it explains a little more why friendship was such a yesod. Look at the answer. He could have said, Darkei Chassidus, there's a Askafia, Birur Hamidus, there's a lot to say. No, friendship. So having a friend is a tremendous thing. There's Knei L'Chorav, there's Knei L'Chachaver. Having a friend. A friend is either a peer, same age. It's not a person who's your authority. It's an equal. Someone you can talk to openly. Different than you would talk to a Rov, for example, or to a Mashpia, or to a mentor. They could also play sometimes the role of friend. So let's not underestimate the importance of having a friend to be able to speak to from your heart in a way that you're not judged, that you're both finding a friend and being a friend to people is something we should look into, something that is part of what Chassidus is all about, definitely Chassidus Applied. So to answer the questions about having a best friend, it's beautiful to hear. And if there is a rift, like you explained, well, I cannot answer to the particulars of this situation because I don't know what happened. But if there's true friendship, why can't there be true repair? Just like there's a rift. If it could be broken, it could be repaired. If it's a truly healthy friend, and the rift is something that's unhealthy, then you have to do whatever you can. Maybe you need to find someone that's more of a mashpia type that can help look into it. Maybe something petty, maybe a misunderstanding. But I would do everything possible because it's not that common that you just come across a really good friend. My advice is that sometimes you'll need a little bittul, sometimes compromise. Maybe not see it exactly that it's completely your way. Maybe you did something, or you think he did something, or if it's she's, I don't know if it's male or female, but if it's a woman to a woman, and I'm talking about, obviously, as I always emphasize here, we're talking about gender separation. Women should have women friends, men should have men friends. That maybe you're underestimating or overestimating something you did or didn't do. But you need to know the details to really answer. If you really care, and I think it's important to have a friend, I think it can help us in a lot of situations. Sometimes there's no one else to turn to. You don't want to speak to your spouse about something. You don't want to necessarily go to a rov for an authoritative. A friend can red in the hearts. You can just express yourself and just get a vent, have a sympathetic ear, maybe not even for advice. Just someone that isha sechav yazeru, or im yidag adam yasichena, just to speak to someone else and just get some relief from that, some support. As far as the second question, the same idea. I mean, we tend to have one-upmanship and we tend to get into competition and battles, and sometimes friends grow apart. But the fact of the matter is, like anything in life, it's what you invest in it. If someone that's a true friend, it's worth investing. And if years have passed, maybe you should call up the fellow and say, let's have coffee, let's have tea, let's sit down and talk, go for a walk, and reconnect. It's hard to do because we get into new cycles of our lives, new transitions, and that's like the past. But if it's that important, in my opinion, there's no question that we should make an effort. From a Chassidic point of view, everyone should have more than one chaver. Some of us are loners, but there's a big power to be able to go with a friend somewhere, someone that has similar wavelength, has similar mindset, and even if they're not exactly similar, but there's a friendship. Friendships also tend to lend themselves to be less competitive usually, because unless you're in the same field, a friend is not that threatening as, for example, someone that's too close for comfort. Siblings often can be more competitive, even though there's a different discussion about the love of siblings is a whole other story, but that in its depth. But a friend has a certain element because you don't go home with that friend. So there is a certain element that it's someone else, but someone you can talk to. I can't emphasize enough the importance of friendship and therefore the importance of doing whatever it takes to repair any rift or any challenge. And if it's someone that's good, someone that's a worthy friend, it's worthwhile making the effort. And don't stand on principle, make the initiative. Stop saying, well, if he calls me, I'll call him back. Make the call, be an adult, mature, and move on with it. Okay. There is some more discussions, but time has clearly caught up with us. Let me see if I can cover anything here. I'll just discuss the final question, which is, should parents intervene in children's marriages? Well, let me put it unequivocally. Many, many letters from the Rebbe and advice. Never. Obviously, we're not talking about the situation of life and death where somebody is literally threatened, so pekuach nefesh. We're talking about in the wear and tear of marriage, there's ups and downs, and it's enough challenging for a couple to deal with it. The Rebbe always says that parents should not get involved, because then parents have all kinds of their emotional connections, and then comes a battle. The parents are, of course, usually in the side of their child, and they can fuel the fire. And especially if the other parents get involved, then you have yourself not just a couple dealing with a challenge, now both sets of parents, and it's like a war. You go to objective rabbonim, objective mentors, objective counselors, therapists, someone that you can trust, and discuss it and review it. Parents should support their children and say, work it out. At times the Rebbe even writes to parents, if you're going to say anything, tell your child that you're supporting the other spouse, your in-law, because that forces the children, we're not talking about little children, we're talking about the married children, to work on it. Now, of course, there are the rare exceptions where there's a serious, if a murderer or some other dangerous situation, obviously it's another story. Someone's taken hostage, of course, those are extremes. But in general, it's something that should be avoided by all means, and it usually causes more problems than it solves, not usually, always. And parents should go find someone they can speak to and try to find someone to help. But just like a parent wouldn't become a surgeon or a doctor to heal their child, sometimes even if you are a doctor, you shouldn't become your doctor's own child, especially when you're emotionally involved. Same thing is here, psychological, emotional issues. Children are connected to parents in very deep ways. They respect their parents and they'll listen, and parents' words can end up haunting marriages and affecting them in ways that the parents don't even want. So it's best to always hold your tongue, find someone else to speak to, and if you're really concerned, find an objective party that can help intervene if necessary. I don't like to end on that note, so I want to end on where I began, and that is Teves, Vayechi, Chassidus Applied, and so on. I've said this so many times, and I don't believe it's my words, but since I have the platform here and I feel the responsibility and had the schus, thank God, to sit at the feet of the Rebbe, the Deir HaShvi, 7th Rebbe from the Alter Rebbe, that we have with us an Eitzer Mole. There's no words to describe the power of the treasures we have. The Rabbeim poured out their hearts and souls in thousands of pages. That means these pages have value. The question is, for whom did they do this? If not for us. So when you speak about Teves, is the Rebbe belonged to Chassidim, the Ksovim, the writings, the manuscripts, the Sfarim he learned, belong to Chassidim. What means Chassidim? To the body of Chassidim and to each individual. Not belong in the context of ownership and property that we're going to sell it, God forbid. That's not possible. Just like you can't sell the Beis HaMikdash, just like Moshe Rabbeinu, the Torah, you can't sell Torah. Torah was given to Mirasha Kihilis Yaakov, to everybody. It's to protect, to cherish, to learn it, and to live by it. And we have this Chassidus that has the power to change lives. It's been seen. People who Chassidus literally change their lives. It has the psychological, the emotional, the soulful messages and tools to change your life, to deal with vices, whether it's anger, addictions, temptations, and also, on the positive end, to actualize your potential, because it gives you the tools to understand yourself, and hence, as a result, to develop channels that can allow yourself to actualize that which you contain within yourself. When you understand what you're made of, what makes you tick, the more you understand what the operator's manual, the CAT scan of God's mind, or the X-ray of your soul looks like, the DNA, you can know how to nourish it. You can know how to nurture it. Just like physical foods. You need vitamins, minerals, and different elements that satisfy and that nourish and nurture different parts of the body. The soul too has chesed, needs to be nurtured, and gevura needs to be nurtured and nourished, and teferes, and netzach, heid, yesed, malchus. So Chassidus is an elaborate blueprint, an elaborate operator's manual, life's operator's manual. And this is a treasure given to us, those that had the schus to be in the right time in the right place, to hear it straight from the Rabbeim, to learn it in the Sfarim that the Rabbeim left us. The Ksovim lo zechayich. It's a gift. He could have taken the Ksovim with him, which of course would beg the question, what's the point of writing them? But the Ksovim lo zechayich, which means, in that you have me. That is a tragedy, a disgrace, if we don't use it to the fullest. And that's what every chassid has to take into heart. I'm not trying to be sharp or dramatic. I'm just trying to state the facts as they are. And if you don't state them that way, then the whole thing becomes optional, becomes a joke. The Eibusher should help us all, coming from Teves, 28 years, going to Vayechi, leading to the end of this month will be Chavdalet Teves, the Alter Rebbe's Istalkus, that we should use these days as an impetus, as a springboard to motivate us to take it seriously, take our shtickl maimer, it could be 5 lines, figure out a way to implement it, talk to your children about it, put your heads together, and find ways to apply the Chassidus that were given to us in our personal lives. This is Chassidus Applied, MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 49. Until next Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m., everyone should have a very Chassidish week, infused with this message. And I will hopefully, please send in your questions or comments to meaningfullife.com/MyLifeLive. And hopefully I will try to address as much as I can address. There's plenty still to address. Everyone have a very hatzlachadika week.